The high desert wind doesn't just whistle, it screams. It carries the taste of grit and the memory of things long dead. For Eliza Vance, a woman banished to the very edge of the Arizona Territory, that scream was a constant companion. She was a pariah, a ghost haunting her own small ranch, until the day the desert brought her a choice. It came in the form of a small, fever-stricken child, a hunted boy from the Comanche tribe. She chose to shield him. She chose to defy the brutal men hunting him. And in doing so, she signed her own death warrant. Or so she thought. What happened the next morning would not only shatter her world, but expose a lie that reached from her dusty porch all the way back to the glittering ballrooms of St. Louis. The Arizona sun was an unblinking eye, a celestial tyrant that baked the very soul out of the land. It bleached the splintered wood of Eliza Vance's 2-room cabin to the color of bone and cracked the earth of her small yard into a spiderweb of deep, thirsty fissures. Her ranch, such as it was, consisted of the cabin, a listing lean-to for her mule, and a chicken coop that housed 3 scrawny hens. The sign that had once hung over the gate, put there by the previous, long-failed homesteader, had been torn down by the wind. But the name remained, whispered in the nearby town of Harmony Creek. They called it Vance's Folly. Eliza Vance, 31 years of age, was herself a folly. She was a woman of education and refinement, a creature of libraries and parlors, now exiled to a world of lye soap and shotgun shells. Her hands, once soft and practiced on the pianoforte, were now raw, calloused, and stained with dirt. She was mending a barbed wire fence, her jaw set in a line as hard as the horizon, when the first tremor of her past echoed in her mind. It was always the wind that brought the memories. The hot, dry sirocco felt like the breath of the gossip-mongers in St. Louis, whispering her name in shocked, delighted tones. Eliza Vance. The scandal. That dreadful business with Augustus Van Tassel. Augustus Van Tassel, a man whose wealth was matched only by his cruelty. He was a titan of industry, a pillar of society, and a predator. Eliza had been a tutor to his young, vapid daughter. She had seen things she should not have seen. Coded ledgers, quiet threats to business rivals, a coldness that bordered on sociopathic. When she had politely refused his unwanted, oily attentions, he had not taken it well. Within a week, a valuable pearl necklace, a Van Tassel family heirloom, was discovered in her travel trunk. She was never tried. Van Tassel was too clever for that. He simply let the accusation hang in the air, a poisonous miasma. He expressed deep disappointment and a hope for her rehabilitation. He dismissed her quietly to avoid further scandal. The result was more effective than a conviction. Every door in St. Louis was slammed shut in her face. Her friends, creatures of the same social stratum, evaporated like morning mist. She was ruined. Her father, a respected but not wealthy philosophy professor, had died of a broken heart. The doctor had called it a stroke, but Eliza knew better. Just 6 months later. With her small inheritance and a desperate need to breathe air that did not taste of betrayal, she had done the unthinkable. She had gone west. She bought this failed, sun-scorched plot of land, sight unseen, from a pamphlet in a dusty land office. Now she was as isolated as a star. The folk in Harmony Creek, a small collection of saloons, mercantile and false-fronted shops, kept their distance. Sheriff Brody, a man whose spine seemed to be made of lukewarm coffee, offered token politeness, but no real protection. The preacher, Reverend Gideon, saw her as a fallen woman, ripe for a public sermon on damnation. The women of the town clutched their children's hands when she passed, as if her particular brand of failure was contagious. so she kept to herself. She learned to shoot the old shotgun her father had kept for varmints. She learned to read the sky for rain and the dust for riders. She learned to live with the silence, a silence so profound it felt like a weight on her chest. Her only regular visitor was the one she dreaded most, Silas Croft. Croft was a man who moved in the shadows of the law. He was a rancher, supposedly, but his herd seemed to consist of unbranded cattle, and his ranch hands looked more like a gallows lineup. His men, burly, silent types like Dutch Malone and the twitchy Jebediah, were never far. Croft had made no secret of his desire for her land. It wasn't worth much, but it had one thing his own sprawling, arid ranch did not. The Folly sat atop the only reliable aquifer in the region. Her small well never ran dry. He had tried buying her out, his voice a low, reasonable purr that made her skin crawl. A lone woman like you, Miss Vance, this land, it's too hard. It'll eat you alive. Let me take this burden off your pretty shoulders. When she refused, the purr had vanished. His eyes, the color of a muddy river, had hardened. This is hard country, ma'am. It has a way of breaking things that won't bend. Since then, the accidents had started. A section of her fence cut, allowing her mule to wander for miles. Her small vegetable garden trampled in the night. A dead coyote dropped in her well, poisoning the water for a week until she could clean it out, hauling bucket after bucket of tainted water until her arms felt like they would tear from their sockets. Sheriff Brody had just shaken his head. No proof, Miss Vance. Can't arrest a man on suspicion. Maybe you should reconsider his offer. Eliza gripped the fence post, her knuckles white. She would not be broken. She had lost her name, her home, her past. She would not lose this last, desolate foothold in the world. She would not give Silas Croft the satisfaction. She finished mending the wire, the metal hot enough to sear her skin. She wiped the sweat and grime from her forehead with her forearm, leaving a muddy streak. As she turned back toward her cabin, she looked at the sky. The western horizon was no longer a clear, pitiless blue. It was a dark, bruised purple, the color of an old wound. A wall of roiling brown dust was building, stacking itself into the heavens. The wind, which had been a screaming companion all day, was suddenly, terrifyingly, silent. The air grew thick, static. The chickens in their coop fell quiet. Eliza knew that look. It was not a storm. It was an apocalypse. A haboob, the old-timers called it. A wall of sand and fury that would scour the land clean. Damnation, she whispered, the curse word feeling foreign and sharp on her tongue. She grabbed her tools and ran for the cabin, the heavy, oppressive silence of the world pressing in on her. She had to secure the shutters, brace the door, and pray that Vance's Folly would not be erased from the map entirely. The desert, it seemed, was not done with her yet. The wind began to moan, a low, rising wail that promised violence. The storm hit not with the grace of rain, but with the blunt force of a freight train. The first gust of wind struck the cabin like a giant's fist, rattling the very bones of the small structure. The world outside the windows vanished, replaced by a churning, opaque wall of sand and grit. The sun was gone, blotted out at 3 in the afternoon. It was midnight in hell. Eliza huddled inside, a damp kerchief tied over her nose and mouth. The fine, powdery dust forced its way through every crack, every seam in the cabin. It coated her tongue, gritted between her teeth, and made her eyes water. The sound was deafening, a continuous, high-pitched shriek that seemed to come from 1,000 throats. It was the sound of the world being unmade. She had done what she could. The mule was as safe as he could be in his lean-to, which was partially shielded by the cabin itself. The chickens were hunkered down. She had braced the main door with her small writing desk and stuffed rags into the gaps under the windows. Now, there was nothing to do but wait. Hours passed, or perhaps it was only minutes. Time lost all meaning in the roaring dark. Eliza sat on her cot, the shotgun resting across her knees. It was less for protection against the storm, and more for the illusion of control. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The storm was a physical manifestation of her isolation, a force of nature trying to scrub her, a lone, unwanted speck from the face of the earth. She must have dozed, lulled into a state of semi-consciousness by the sheer sonic weight of the wind. She was dreaming of St. Louis, of a waltz, of Augustus Van Tassel's hand on her arm, his thumb rubbing small, proprietary circles on her wrist. She tried to pull away, but his grip was like iron. "You have nowhere else to go, my dear Eliza," he whispered, his voice drowning out the orchestra. "Nowhere at all." Thud. Eliza woke with a gasp, her heart leaping into her throat. The shotgun felt heavy in her lap. The storm was still raging, a maddening, chaotic symphony. Thud. It was at the door. Louder this time, but not with the sharp rap of a fist. It was a dull, heavy, desperate sound. "Who's there?" she shouted, knowing her voice would be stolen by the wind. Silence. Only the shriek of the haboob. It must have been the wind. A branch. A piece of debris. She was hearing things. Her nerves were frayed. Thud. Thud. Scrape. This time it was followed by a low, scraping sound, like dead weight being dragged across the porch. Someone was out there. Eliza's blood ran cold. No human being could be alive in this. It was a death sentence. Was it Croft? Had he come to finish her, using the storm as cover? But the sound was wrong. It was weak. She moved, shoving the heavy desk aside just enough to peer through the crack in the doorframe. The wind tried to rip the door from her hand, slamming it back against her shoulder. She saw nothing but a brown, swirling void. "Hello!" she yelled again, her voice cracking. Then she heard it, a sound so small and thin it was almost impossible. A whimper. Her heart, which had been frozen in terror, now seized with a different, sharper emotion. She unbarred the door. She had to put her entire weight into it, fighting the wall of wind. The second the door opened, the storm invaded. A torrent of dust and debris exploded into the cabin, extinguishing her lantern, plunging the room into near-total darkness. The wind shrieked in triumph, and then she saw it. It wasn't a man. It was a heap of wet, muddy rags at her feet. She bent down, her hands fumbling in the blinding dust. The rags were a small body. She grabbed it, a dead weight, and pulled it inside, fighting the storm for possession of the small form. With a final, desperate heave, she got it over the threshold and slammed the door shut, barring it against the screaming chaos. She scrambled in the dark for her matches, her hands shaking so violently she could barely strike one. The match flared, and she relit the lantern. She turned, her breath held. On her floor, in a puddle of mud and storm water, lay a child, a boy. No older than 6 or 7. His skin was a deep copper, his hair a mat of wet black. He was dressed in simple leather leggings and a tunic, now torn and soaked. His face was streaked with dirt, but she could see the faint, delicate markings of paint on his cheeks, blurred by rain and tears. He was Comanche. Eliza stared, her mind unable to process the sight. The Comanche were a rumor, a ghost story whispered in Harmony Creek. They were hostiles. The bogeymen used to scare children and justify military patrols. They were never seen this close. Not ever. The boy was unconscious, or near to it. A gash on his forehead, raw and purple, was bleeding sluggishly. She put her hand to his chest. His breathing was a shallow, rattling gasp. His skin was burning. Fever, and a head wound. Eliza, the pariah of Harmony Creek, the woman who had lost everything, was suddenly faced with a choice that made all her previous troubles seem like parlor games. To help this child was to invite a world of trouble she could not even begin to imagine. If Silas Croft was a wolf, the U.S. cavalry, who took a dim view of Indian lovers, were an army of them. And the boy's own people. If they came looking for him, what would they think, finding him in a white woman's cabin? The boy coughed, a terrible wet sound that ripped from his small chest. His eyes flickered open, but they were vacant, glazed with fever. In that moment, he was not Comanche. He was not a hostile. He was not a symbol of the war between two worlds. He was just a child who was dying on her floor. Eliza's jaw tightened. The Vances, for all their academic abstractions, had one practical family motto: you do what must be done. All right, she whispered to the storm, to the ghost of Van Tassel, to the boy. Damnation it is. She grabbed her cleanest rags and the whiskey she kept for medicinal purposes, but had never touched. She tore the rags into strips, and gently, with a touch she hadn't known her calloused hands still possessed, she began to clean the wound on the boy's forehead. The storm could rage all it wanted. It had brought her a new, more dangerous, and more immediate battle to fight. The storm had broken by morning, but it left a new world in its wake. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, and the air was thick with the sharp, clean smell of ozone and wet creosote. The landscape was altered. The small dunes and drifts of red earth all shifted, as if a giant hand had smoothed and reshaped the land. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with a different, more human smell. Fever, and the pungent herbal scent of the poultice Eliza had applied to the boy's head. She had sat with him all night, a marathon of quiet, desperate work. She had gotten small sips of water and broth into him, and his fever, while still dangerously high, had not climbed. He was resting, his breathing still shallow but more regular. He was tucked into her own cot, a small, fragile form, lost in her quilt. Eliza stood at her small window, sipping the lukewarm dregs of her coffee. The dust that had invaded her home was now a thick, gritty film over every surface. She felt as though she hadn't slept in a year. Her entire body ached with tension. She had made a small root cellar under her cabin's floorboards years ago, a place to keep the few vegetables she grew from rotting. It was small, dark, and damp, and as she looked at the sleeping child, she knew it was his only chance. She had just finished checking the poultice when she heard it. Not the wind. Not a child's cough. The jingle of a bridle. The low, soft nickering of a horse. Her blood turned to ice. She snatched the shotgun from its place by the door and peered through a knothole in the wood. 3 riders. Silas Croft, flanked by Dutch Malone and Jebediah. They weren't riding fast. They were ambling, casual, as if on a Sunday stroll. But their eyes, even from this distance, were scanning, hunting. They were tracking. The storm had wiped away all but the most recent tracks, but the boy, in his fever-driven delirium, must have left a trail. Eliza's mind raced. There was no time to run, no place to hide, except one. She moved with a speed she didn't know she possessed. She flew to the cot, gently but urgently, scooping the sleeping boy into her arms. He whimpered, his head lolling. "Shh, child, shh. I am sorry for this. I am so sorry," she murmured, her voice a strained whisper. She crossed to the center of the cabin, knelt, and pulled up the braided rug. She grabbed the iron ring on the trap door and pulled. It opened with a soft groan of protesting wood. The smell of damp earth and potatoes rose up. She lowered the boy into the darkness. "Be quiet," she whispered, knowing he probably couldn't understand her. "Please God, be quiet." She placed her own canteen of fresh water and a strip of dried jerky beside him, a futile gesture. She then gently lowered the door, leaving it open just a crack for air, and slid the heavy rug back over it, careful to align the pattern as it had been. She was just rising to her feet, wiping the dirt from her hands, when the knock came. It was not a thud this time. It was a sharp, confident, arrogant rap of a heavy fist. Knock, knock, knock. Eliza took a deep breath, forcing her heart out of her throat. She picked up the shotgun, held it for a moment, then deliberately set it down on the table, visible but not in her hands. A threat was weakness. Composure was strength. She smoothed her apron, a useless gesture as it was filthy, and walked to the door. She unbarred it and opened it, standing framed in the doorway, blocking the entrance. "Mr. Croft," she said, her voice astoundingly level. "To what do I owe the displeasure?" Silas Croft was smiling. It was a terrible sight. His teeth were yellow, but his smile was wide, an expression of pure, predatory amusement. He was a tall man, made taller by his high-heeled boots and his long grey duster. He wore his twin silver-plated revolvers high on his hips. "Why, Miss Vance, so formal," he purred, removing his hat. "Just a neighborly call. We saw the storm hit. Worried you might have been blown away." "As you can see, I was not," Eliza said, her hand gripping the doorframe. "My cabin stands. So it does." "So it does." Croft's eyes left hers and darted past her, into the dim interior of the cabin. His gaze swept the room, lingering on the table, the unmade cot, the cold hearth. You got company, Miss Vance. Seems a bit untidy in there, even for you." Dutch Malone, a heavy, bearish man, chuckled, a sound like gravel grinding. Jebediah, thin and nervous, just watched, his hand twitching near his holster. "I have been cleaning up after the storm, Mr. Croft, as I'm sure you will be," Eliza said, her voice dripping ice. "If that's all, I am very busy." She tried to close the door. Croft's boot shot out, stopping it. "Now, that ain't neighborly at all," he said, his smile tightening. "See, we're not just checking on your health. We're on business. We're looking for a stray." Eliza's heart hammered. "A stray? One of your unbranded cattle, perhaps?" Croft's eyes narrowed. "Nothing like that. A pest. A little red-skinned one. Comanche. Ran off from his family." He leaned in, his voice dropping. "There's a hefty reward for him, dead or alive. Seems he's the son of someone important. A chief, maybe. The cavalry at Fort Grant is willing to pay top dollar to get him. A peace offering, they call it. Leverage." Eliza fought to keep her expression neutral. "I have no interest in the cavalry's business, or yours. I have seen no one." "Are you sure about that?" Croft pushed the door open, forcing Eliza to step back. He stepped inside, filling her small cabin with his presence. He smelled of sweat, tobacco, and something rotten. Dutch and Jebediah followed, fanning out. "Get out of my house," Eliza said, her voice low and dangerous. "Now, Miss Vance, I'm just going to have a look," Croft said, his eyes lighting on the shotgun. "Always prepared, ain't we?" He walked around the cabin, kicking at her small trunk, peering into her empty pantry. Dutch moved toward the cot, his piggish eyes scanning it. "This here cot's warm," Dutch said, his voice a low rumble. "And it smells funny." Eliza's blood froze, the herbal poultice, the fever. "I had the ague," Eliza snapped, stepping in front of Dutch. "The smell is my own remedy, sage and onion. Now I am telling you, as the owner of this property, to leave." Croft turned, his eyes fixed on her. He was no longer smiling. "You're a feisty one, ain't ya? All that Eastern schooling. Think you're better than us." He walked toward her, slowly, until he was just inches away. She could smell the whiskey on his breath. "But you ain't. You're just like the rest of us. You're just dirt. And you're on my land." "This land is mine," Eliza said, her voice shaking, but her gaze locked on his. "Paid for, and legal." "Legal?" Croft scoffed. He looked down at the braided rug. "Legal don't mean much out here." He stopped. He was looking at the rug. Eliza's heart stopped. This is new," he said, nudging the rug with the toe of his boot. "It's a rug, Mr. Croft." "Yeah, but it's clean." He nudged it again. "Everything in here is covered in a layer of dust, except this rug. And—" he bent down, sniffing. "What is that smell? Earth, fresh earth." He looked up at her, and his smile returned, but this time it was a shark's smile. All teeth. "You're a terrible liar, Miss Vance." He reached down and grabbed the edge of the rug. "No!" Eliza shrieked, launching herself at him. It was a futile, foolish gesture. He swatted her away with one arm, sending her crashing into the table. The shotgun clattered to the floor. Croft ripped the rug back, revealing the wooden trapdoor. "Well, well, well," he breathed, his eyes gleaming. He unholstered his revolver and pointed it at the iron ring. "Look what we have here, a little rabbit hole." He motioned to Dutch. "Open it." Dutch lumbered forward. Eliza scrambled to her feet, her mind screaming. She grabbed the first thing she could find, her heavy iron skillet from the hearth, and swung it with all her might. She was aiming for Dutch, but he moved. The skillet connected with a clang against the doorframe, the vibration jarring her to the bone. In that split second of chaos, Croft made his mistake. He turned to laugh. It was all the opening Eliza needed. She didn't attack. She ran. She dove for the shotgun, scooped it up, and scrambled back, placing herself between the men and the trapdoor. She cocked both barrels. The click-click was the loudest sound in the world. Croft, Dutch, and Jebediah froze. "Get out!" Eliza panted, the heavy gun wavering in her hands. "Get out. Now." Croft's smile was gone. His face was a mask of pure fury. "You're making a mistake, woman. A fatal one." "The first man who moves," Eliza said, her voice a raw, torn whisper, "is the man who dies. I may not get all of you, but I will, God as my witness, get one of you. And my first bullet is for you, Silas." She leveled the gun straight at his chest. For a long, agonizing moment, nobody moved. The only sound was Eliza's ragged breathing and a faint, muffled whimper from beneath the floorboards. Croft heard it. His eyes flickered to the trapdoor, then back to Eliza. A slow, ugly understanding dawned on his face. "So," he whispered. "It's true." He held up his hands, a gesture of mock surrender. "All right, Miss Vance, you win. For today." He backed toward the door, his eyes never leaving hers. "But you can't stay awake forever, and that gun's got to run out of bullets." He motioned for his men. Dutch and Jebediah backed out, their expressions a mix of anger and surprise. Croft stood in the doorway. "That boy," he said, his voice soft, "is a death sentence. His people will come for him, or mine will. Either way, you're a dead woman. You just chose a slower, harder way to go." He put his hat on, tipped the brim, and was gone. Eliza stood, unmoving, the shotgun still leveled at the empty doorway, for a full 10 minutes. Her arms screamed in protest, but she didn't lower the weapon until she heard the sound of their horses fading into the distance. Only then did she collapse, sinking to the floor, her entire body shaking in a violent, uncontrollable tremor. The shotgun clattered from her numb fingers. She had won. But Croft was right. She had just signed her own death warrant, and beneath her feet, from the dark, earthen cellar, the sound of a child's soft, terrified weeping began. The silence that followed Croft's departure was more terrifying than the hubbub. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket, filled with the echo of his threats and the sound of the boy's muffled sobs. Eliza finally pushed herself to her feet, her knees watery. She shoved the heavy bar back across the door, her hands shaking so much it took 3 tries. She was trapped. Trapped by her own actions, trapped by the child in her cellar, trapped by the vast, open desert that now felt like the walls of a prison. She slid the rug aside and lifted the trap door. "It's all right," she called down, her voice thin. "They're gone. You're safe." She lit the lantern and lowered it into the darkness. The boy was huddled in the far corner, his small body drawn into a tight, trembling ball. His eyes, wide with terror, reflected the lamplight. "Come," she said gently, holding out her hand. "It's over." He didn't move. He just stared at her, his dark eyes unfathomable. He was a wild creature, cornered and terrified. Eliza sighed. She couldn't blame him. She had just been in an armed standoff above his head. She lowered herself into the cellar, the smell of damp earth and her own fear rising to meet her. She sat on the hard, packed floor, a few feet from him, and simply waited. She didn't talk. She didn't try to touch him. She just sat, her back against the earthen wall, and let the silence stretch. She let him see her, not as a threat, not as a savior, but just as another person in the dark. After what felt like an eternity, his trembling began to subside. He was still watching her, but the sheer panic in his eyes was replaced by a wary, intense curiosity. He was small, but he was not weak. She could see the wiry strength in his limbs, the intelligence in his gaze. He was a survivor. "I am Eliza," she said softly, pointing to her chest. "Eliza." He said nothing. "Water?" she asked, holding up the canteen she had left for him. His eyes flicked to the canteen, and his tongue darted out to lick his dry, cracked lips. He gave a single, tiny nod. She unscrewed the cap and slid it gently across the floor toward him. He watched it for a long moment. Then his hand, small and dirt-streaked, shot out and grabbed it. He drank, his throat working convulsively, the water spilling down his chin. He drank until it was empty, and then, his gaze still locked on hers, he slid it back. It was a truce. "Good," she whispered. "Now, let's get you out of this hole. Your head, it needs cleaning." She climbed out and held out her hand again. This time, after a long hesitation, he reached up and placed his small, hot hand in hers. His grip was surprisingly strong. She pulled him up into the cabin. The rest of the day passed in a strange, dreamlike haze. Eliza tended to him, and he let her. The fever was still there, a fire under his skin. She cleaned the gash on his head again, which had been dirtied by the cellar, and applied a fresh poultice of crushed yarrow and sage. He winced, but he did not cry out. She made him a thin cornmeal gruel, and he ate, slowly at first, then ravenously. She learned his name, or a version of it. He was trying to tell her something, pointing to the sky, and then to a hawk that was circling in the distance. He made a soft, trilling sound. "Hawk?" she asked. He shook his head, frustrated. He pointed to his chest. "Tav," he said, tapping his sternum. "Tav vetu. Tav vetu," she repeated. It felt good in her mouth. "Tavi." A small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of his mouth. He pointed at her. "Eliza." She smiled back. It was the first real smile that had crossed her face in months, perhaps years. As dusk fell, a new kind of terror set in. Night. Croft's threat hung in the air. You can't stay awake forever. She barred the door. She shuttered the windows. She relit the lantern, but kept it low. She sat in her rocking chair, the shotgun across her lap, and watched the child. Tavi. He had fallen asleep, not in the cot, but on the hard floor, wrapped in her quilt, close to the fire she'd built. He seemed to feel safer on the ground, closer to the earth. The night was a crucible. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind, every hoot of a distant owl sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through her. Her eyes burned. Her muscles ached from the tension of holding the heavy shotgun. She was a single, flickering candle in a vast, devouring darkness. She thought about St. Louis. She thought about the man who had ruined her, Augustus Van Tassel. She had fled him, fled that life, only to find herself in a more primal, more deadly version of the same story. A powerful, cruel man wanted what she had, first her virtue, now her land, and would destroy her to get it. But this time, it was different. In St. Louis, she had been a victim. She had let the whispers and the accusations paralyze her. She had run. Now, sitting in a dark cabin, holding a shotgun, with a Comanche child sleeping at her feet, she was something else. She was a fighter. She had faced down Silas Croft. She had chosen. A profound, almost violent clarity settled over her. She had been Vance's folly for so long, the educated woman playing at survival. But she was surviving. She had shielded this child. She had not broken. She realized with a jolt that she was no longer afraid of Silas Croft. She was angry. She was filled with a cold, clear rage that burned brighter and hotter than any fever. He had threatened a child. He had invaded her home. He had underestimated her. And that, Eliza Vance decided, would be his final, fatal mistake. She didn't know how. She didn't know when. But this was her land. This was her home. And she would not be moved. She watched Tavi sleep. His face, in the firelight, was relaxed. The lines of fear were gone. He trusted her. This small, silent child from a world she couldn't imagine trusted her. She had a purpose. It was, she thought, the first time in her life she had truly had one. The longest night wore on. Eliza did not sleep. She watched. She waited. And she held the line. The dawn would come, and with it, a reckoning. She was no longer a victim. She was a guardian, and the desert would learn to fear her, too. Dawn did not creep. It bled onto the horizon, a raw crimson wound that split the night from the day. The air was cold and sharp, holding the promise of the day's coming heat. Eliza was exhausted, her bones feeling like they were filled with sand. She had not slept, but her mind was sharper than it had ever been. The shotgun was a familiar weight in her hands. Tavi woke with the first light. He sat up, his eyes immediately finding hers. The fear was gone, replaced by that same, solemn watchfulness. He was still weak, but the fever had broken. His skin was cool to the touch. Eliza gave him a small, weary smile. "Good morning, Tavi." She gave him the last of the gruel, which he ate, and a fresh cup of water. And then, a new sound. It was not the jingle of Croft's bridle. It was a low, rhythmic thunder. It was the sound of many horses, moving not with the casual amble of bandits, but with the trained, purposeful gait of a single, powerful entity. Eliza's heart leapt into her throat. Cavalry! Had Croft brought the cavalry? She ran to the window, her heart pounding. She pulled back the shutter, and her heart stopped. It was not the cavalry. The ridge, the one that overlooked her small valley, was lined with them. Dozens of them. They were silhouettes against the bloody dawn, their forms unearthly and terrifying. Warriors, on horseback. Their lances, tipped with feathers, caught the first rays of the sun, looking like a forest of thin, sharp spears. Comanche. They were not moving. They were just watching, waiting. A silent, terrifying delegation. "Tavi," she whispered, her voice a thread. "Tavi, get in the cellar, now!" She turned, but the boy was not at the table. He was standing beside her at the window, his small hand pressed against the glass. He was not afraid. His face was alive with an emotion she couldn't name. It looked like relief. He pointed. "Father," he whispered. Just one word. Eliza looked back at the ridge. One of the riders was slightly ahead of the others. He was larger, his silhouette more imposing. He wore a full-feathered headdress that cascaded down his back. Even from this distance, he radiated an aura of absolute, unshakable authority. "Oh God," Eliza breathed. They had come for the boy. And then, another sound from the other direction, the clatter of horses moving fast, from the direction of Harmony Creek. Eliza spun to the other window, a cloud of dust. Riders. 5, no, 6 of them. This time she recognized the man in the lead. Sheriff Brody, his tin star glinting. He had a posse of frightened-looking townsmen with him, all holding rifles. "Trapped," she whispered. She was caught between a Comanche war party and a lynch mob. Brody's posse skidded to a halt 100 yards from her cabin, forming a ragged, nervous line. They had seen the warriors on the ridge. The warriors on the ridge saw them. A single, guttural cry echoed across the valley. This was it. This was the spark. Her cabin, Vance's Folly, was about to become a battlefield. But the warrior in the lead, the one Tavi called Father, did not move to attack. He raised his lance, slowly, deliberately, and he began to ride. Not fast, a slow, deliberate, almost royal procession, down from the ridge. Alone. He rode into the valley, his horse a magnificent black war pony. The other warriors remained on the ridge, a silent, menacing audience. Sheriff Brody and his men shifted nervously. "Hold your fire, boys!" Brody yelled, his voice cracking with fear. The warrior did not even look at them. His gaze was fixed, utterly and completely, on Eliza's cabin. On her. He stopped his horse 20 yards from her porch. Eliza's hands were slick with sweat on the shotgun. This was the chief. Tavi's father. He had come. Tavi grabbed her hand. "Nistar," he said, his voice firm. He tugged her toward the door. "Nistar!" "What?" Eliza looked at him, confused. "Nistar," he repeated, pointing at her, then at the door. He was commanding her. To go outside. This was madness, but the warrior waited. He was magnificent and terrifying. His face was painted in streaks of red and black. His chest was bare, crisscrossed with scars. He was the living embodiment of the raw, untamed land she lived in. Eliza looked at Brody, who was waving his arms frantically for her to stay inside. She looked at the silent line of warriors on the ridge. She looked at the small, fierce boy beside her. And she made her choice. She set the shotgun down. Tavi nodded, a solemn, adult gesture. Eliza took a deep breath. She unbarred the door, and she stepped out onto the porch, into the red morning light, unarmed to face the proud warrior who had come for his son. The world went utterly silent. The wind stopped. The insects stopped. The only sound was the heavy, labored breathing of Brody's horse. The warrior's eyes, dark and piercing, met hers. They were not filled with hate or anger. They were assessing. They held the weight of centuries. He dismounted, a single, fluid motion. He was a giant of a man. He looked at her, and then at the door of her cabin. And then, from behind her, Tavi ran out. He sprinted across the yard, his small legs pumping, and launched himself at the warrior. "Father!" he cried. The warrior's stern, impassive face broke. He knelt and caught his son in his arms, crushing him to his chest, his eyes closing, a low, guttural word of prayer or relief rumbling from his chest. He held his son, his face buried in the boy's dark hair, for a long, long time. Sheriff Brody let out a shaky breath. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. Eliza stood, her hands clenched at her sides, and watched the reunion. She had done the right thing. Whatever happened now, she had done the right thing. The warrior finally stood, settling Tavi on his hip. He looked at Eliza. And then he began to speak. He spoke in the low, rhythmic, liquid tones of the Comanche language. He spoke for a full minute, his voice rising and falling. Eliza, of course, did not understand a single word. She just stood, her gaze unwavering, and listened. When he was finished, he reached for a leather pouch on his belt. Sheriff Brody, mistaking the movement, raised his rifle. "Easy now!" The warrior ignored him. He pulled something from the pouch. He walked forward, stopping just at the edge of her porch. He looked at her, his dark eyes searching her face, and then he held out his hand. In his palm was a small, intricately beaded, turquoise and white, marriage basket. Sheriff Brody gasped. "My God, woman," he whispered, his voice full of awe and terror. He's proposing marriage." Eliza stared at the object in the warrior's hand. A marriage basket. The words of Sheriff Brody echoed in the dead-still air. "He's proposing marriage." Her mind reeled. This was not possible. This was a fevered dream. She, Eliza Vance, the outcast of St. Louis, the pariah of Harmony Creek, being proposed to by a Comanche war chief in front of a terrified posse. The warrior, Tavi's father, pushed the basket toward her, his expression insistent. Tavi, still perched on his father's hip, giggled, a bright, happy sound that was utterly at odds with the tension of the moment. "Nista," Tavi said, pointing at Eliza. Then he pointed at the basket. "What does it mean?" Eliza asked, her voice a dry rasp. The warrior said nothing. He just held out the basket. "Mom," Brody called, his voice shaky. You best be careful. Don't offend him. But, my God." Eliza looked at the basket. It was beautiful. The craftsmanship was exquisite. It was a gift of something. But marriage? She had saved his son. Was this the price? Was this the reward? Her, a white woman, to become the bride of a chief? It was the stuff of penny dreadfuls, not real life. But the warrior's eyes held no romance. They were not the eyes of a suitor. They were the eyes of a king, a statesman. This was a transaction. But what kind? I don't understand," she said, to him, to herself. The warrior's brow furrowed in frustration. He barked a command over his shoulder. From the line of warriors on the ridge, a single, younger rider detached himself and rode down. He was young, perhaps 17, and he looked terrified. He spoke halting, broken English. "He is Mahivist," the young man said, pointing to the chief. "Redbird. He is Ta Nikewi, the great chief." "I am honored," Eliza said, her heart hammering. Thank you," the young warrior translated, stumbling over the words. "You save, son, Tavetu, you brave, Nista." "What does that mean?" "Nista?" Eliza asked. The translator looked confused. "It mean sister." Eliza's breath caught. Sister, not wife. "Then, the basket?" she asked, pointing. "Gift," the translator said. "For Nista, for Family. It's not a marriage proposal," Sheriff Brody blurted out, his voice full of anticlimactic disappointment. Redbird looked at Brody for the first time, a look of such profound contempt that the sheriff actually took a step back. Redbird turned back to Eliza. He set the basket on the porch step. Then he barked another command. His warriors had not been idle. While he was riding down, they had apparently been hunting. 2 of his men rode down, leading a pack mule. They stopped, and from the mule they unceremoniously dumped 3 heavy, canvas-wrapped bundles onto the ground. And they dumped a 4th object, a worn, leather-bound book. "What is that?" Eliza asked, her voice trembling. Redbird pointed at the first bundle. He said one word, a name. "Silas Croft," the young translator said. Eliza's hand flew to her mouth. Redbird pointed to the next 2. "Dutch, Jebediah." "His men," Eliza whispered, horrified, and, to her shame, relieved. "They track Tavi," the translator said, his voice flat. "They follow him to your house yesterday, after storm." "I know," Eliza said. "I faced them." Redbird spoke, his voice a low growl. The translator nodded. "You know, he watch from ridge. He see you with fire stick. He see you, Nistar." Eliza's mind flashed back. Had he been watching? Had that silent, terrifying audience been there yesterday? Had they watched her entire confrontation with Croft? "They left," the translator continued. "They planned to come back at night for boy and you." Eliza felt sick. "You can't stay awake forever." Croft's last words. "My warriors, find them," the translator said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "They not come back." Karmic retribution, delivered by the desert itself. The men who had hunted her, who had planned to murder her in her sleep, were now 3 canvas bundles in her yard. Sheriff Brody looked like he was going to be sick. He admits to killing them?" Redbird looked at Brody, said a sharp word. "He not kill them," the translator corrected. "He execute them. They hunt child. They break law, his law, in his land." Redbird then pointed at the book. "And this," the translator said. "This was with Croft. His magic book." Eliza stepped off the porch, her legs moving as if in a dream. She walked past the grim bundles and knelt in the dirt, her hands hovering over the leather-bound book. It was a ledger. She opened it. The first page was a list of names: ranchers in the valley. H. Smith, burned out. G. Allen, bought out. P. Jones, scared off. And then her own name. E. Vance, Vance's Folly. Section 14, to be cleared, stubborn. Her fingers shaking turned the page. It was a log of accounts, payments, dates, amounts, and a name. Payments from the St. Louis Terror Company. Eliza's vision swam. The St. Louis Terror Company. She flipped to the back, to the correspondence. Letters, copied in Croft's own rough hand. Instructions. All land in section 14 to 20 must be cleared by year's end. The Comanche must be provoked. We need the military to step in and pacify the area. Any means necessary. Your bonus is contingent on a full-scale conflict. And the signature at the bottom. The name she had not seen in 3 years. The name that haunted her nightmares. A. Van Tassel. Augustus Van Tassel. It all clicked. It all fell into place, in a tidal wave of agonizing, horrifying clarity. Croft wasn't a simple bandit. He was an agent. He wasn't trying to steal her land for himself. He was working for Van Tassel. Van Tassel, who was not content to just ruin her, but to follow her across a continent and drive her from the very land she had fled to. And the Comanche, they weren't the hostiles. They were the other victims. Van Tassel wanted this land. He was paying Croft to start a war, to use the cavalry as his own private land-clearing army, and kidnapping Tavi, the son of the chief. That would have been the ultimate provocation. That would have started a war that would have burned the entire territory to the ground. Silas Croft hadn't been after a reward from the cavalry. He was going to murder the boy, blame it on settlers, and watch the world burn. Eliza stood up, the ledger clutched in her hand. Her world, which had been small and grey, was suddenly terribly sharp and clear. Redbird was watching her. He knew. He didn't know the names, but he knew what that book was. "This," she said, holding up the ledger, "is the real weapon. Say," the translator began, "it is your gift. You save his blood. He give you your name back, the marriage gift." It wasn't a proposal. It wasn't a basket or a blanket or even the gruesome justice in the canvas bags. The gift was her vindication. The gift was the proof. The gift was the means to destroy the man who had truly tried to destroy her. Redbird had not brought her a gift of marriage. He had brought her a gift of war, a war she could finally win. Sheriff Brody and his posse watched, stunned, their fear giving way to a dumbfounded awe. Eliza Vance stood in her yard, the ledger in one hand, the basket in the other. She looked at Redbird, seeing not just a warrior, but a strategist who had delivered a brutal, precise justice. He understood her war was not fought with lances, but with paper. The ledger was her vindication. "Tell him," Eliza said to the translator, her voice strong, "this gift is the greatest I have ever received." Redbird nodded once. He gave a sharp command, and his warriors efficiently collected the 3 bodies. Say, this trash, not dirty, his sister's land," the translator explained. Redbird mounted his horse, settling Tavi in front of him. The boy looked back at Eliza, his small hand over his heart. "Nistar," Eliza returned the gesture, her own hand over her heart. Redbird looked at her one last time, a look of profound, equal respect. Then, as one, the entire war party turned. They rode up the ridge and vanished into the desert, as if they were a dream. "Miss Vance," Brody stammered, dismounting. I don't know. You should go back to Harmony Creek, Sheriff," Eliza said, her voice cutting. "Tell the people Silas Croft is gone. The Comanche are not the enemy. They just solved a problem you were unwilling to." She tucked the ledger under her arm. "I'll be in town tomorrow. I have a very long telegram to send. To St. Louis." Brody, utterly defeated, could only nod. He and his posse rode away, leaving her in the silence. Eliza walked back into her cabin. It was a mess, but it was hers. She sat at her small desk and opened the book. The woman known as Vance's Folly was gone, scoured away by the storm. In her place was Eliza Vance, Nistar, and the woman who was about to bring down an empire. The frontier was not just a place of dust and blood. It was a crucible. It took people like Eliza Vance and burned away everything they thought they were, only to forge them into what they had to be. She shielded a child, and in return, she was given back her name, her power, and her future. The marriage gift was not a proposal, but a weapon, a ledger that would rewrite her history and tear down a corrupt empire from 1,000 miles away. Her story is a testament to the fact that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to protect another, even when you are terrified. Did Eliza's story of grit and unexpected justice move you? These hidden dramas, these real-life twists of fate, are what we love to explore. If you want to hear more stories about the hidden heroes and karmic justice of the Wild West, Please like this video and share it with someone who loves a powerful story. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel. Hit that bell icon so you never miss a single tale of survival, revenge, and redemption.